Hi, we at Screenplays are fortunate to have time to speak with James Field, who's the Director of Technology for NDS. Thanks, James, for taking some time. One of the things we'd like to address and find out more about is this new remote UI, user interface concept that obviously is driven by operators, service providers' desire to get their content in the face of the users on whatever devices they happen to be. Part of the whole TV everywhere extension into multi-device, multi-screen, and of course having a navigation system that is compatible with those devices and that exposes the brand of the operator to make sure their video, their premium content is first and foremost in the front of the user is top of mind as part of this whole multi-screen agenda. So you guys are providing the technological underpinnings for being able to do this, which is quite a challenge because everybody wants to do it differently. Everybody's looking at where to put this, what kind of devices they want to serve first, how close it is to their legacy UI versus is it a new type of UI altogether. So talk to me a little bit, first of all, about how you're set up to accommodate those different directions that people want to go in.
I think you nailed it there. Basically, there's fragmentation in both devices. There's fragmentation in where you can get your content. And for MSOs and MVPDs today, that's a pretty challenging environment to compete in, especially as the horizontal market is evolving pretty rapidly and consumers are seeing a lot of choice and a lot of availability there. So NDS is a provider of guides worldwide. We've got about 216 million, I think, last count out there. So we work in a number of different ways with operators. We can supply kind of off-the-shelf guides. We can do sort of pretty good customizations, or we can even be commissioned from our design studio to do the whole thing. But that doesn't solve the technology problem.
Yeah.
So we also work from a professional services standpoint with operators to see which choices they could or should make when it comes to deploying guides and how they can get them onto other devices. So this is going to be important so they can make use of the devices. They can, as you said, keep their brand first and foremost in the minds of their consumers and their customers. So when it comes down to where should I get my content, it's, I need to go to my MSO, as opposed to other brands which are popping up, and that's going to be important to them. So when it comes down to remote UIs, how can an operator today address the delivery and maintenance of their brand and their look and feel across all these devices? So our remote UI technology does this by choosing, first of all, the most appropriate means of presenting that guiding experience on the device. So whether that's HTML5, Flash, Java, or other emerging technologies.
And that can be device dependent, so it changes from one device to the next.
And even we're seeing fragmentation. I mean, people refer to Android, for instance. There's multiple different versions of Android, from ice cream sandwich, jelly beans on the way.
And multiple different versions of implementations of HTML5.
Indeed, and HTML5 is a great catch-all as well. Yeah. It's really, once you've got HTML5, is it WebKit, and then who's maintaining it? So the world is not equal. So choosing the devices you go for, you've got to have a device strategy, and I guess iOS and iPad has been the choice du jour of the CEO. I want one of these. We've got to be on there, and that's great. We're working with customers like Cox in the US, Cox TV Connect. We're working with satellite guys as well, and we're bringing their experiences out onto other devices. Currently, the technique of doing this has been through an embedded app. And there's a number of reasons for this, which we'll talk about probably in a later session about the security side of things. But the goal really, certainly for in-home viewing, is to get the content expressed and the navigation of the content, whether that's being able to search what's on your DVR, what's on your VOD service, and what's on live through a single device. And we're seeing customers who are deploying apps because of the speed of deployment on these horizontal devices as well, which is typically a faster time to market. But when it comes down to rendering the UI, you've got to get that from either from the cloud or from a gateway device. So it's a question of giving the best performance as well. So you're caching data in the guide as well. So typically you're seeing in horizontal devices and over-the-top services far richer guides than you're getting on a conventional MSO service. There's a lot of use of video promos, there's poster art, it's just not the simple sort of text stuff we get before, and the grid is necessary. It's very much, especially on touch devices, you're scrolling through the cover flow revolution that Apple brought to us probably 3-4 years ago now. That's pretty much adopted everywhere. So delivering that experience in HTML5, for example, is quite a challenge to do that and to dynamically serve that, especially when essentially it's individual sessions. We've seen some people looking at solutions where they're deploying literally video on demand sessions for each user, which might be sustainable with some of the higher end residential gateways we're seeing today, but typically it wouldn't scale. We know Switch Digital Video,
would not scale.
It's kind of, it's great if you're a vendor selling these video on demand kits, where it's one-to-one. Great, we'll get that working. And clearly a lot of people are looking at guides. They're not watching VOD per se, but they're looking at guides. So it's finding the right match of technology coupled with design, and that's what NDS is pretty expert at doing today. When we've deployed guides such as the Trio guide for Cox, we took their design guidelines and we worked on the implementation, and we converted that into the best possible performance on the available hardware. That was in the set-top space, but we can also extend that, and our expertise has grown now to encompass the Androids, iOS, and even smart TV today.
Well, Cox is a very interesting example because they're at the cutting edge on the set-top side. So now they're plunging with you into the device side. And one thing occurs to me is, okay, are they satisfied that what they've created with Trio on the set-top is the template to follow on the multi-device side, or are they going beyond that and pushing the envelope even further? So it's
well, I think you'd have to ask them specifically about that. But I think if we look at general trends in the industry, we are seeing that with the speed of deployment on horizontal devices, with more flexible and quicker to market options for deploying guides, we're seeing some iterations and experimentation in how else you can navigate. So typically it would be a remote control, a companion device. So you would still view and consume your content on the main screen, but you can then use the companion device as a means of browsing through the metadata, looking at the content, and ultimately sort of putting that.
But you're also looking at being able to access the content on that device.
Yes, and that's in-home is easier than out of home.
Yeah, and that has to do a lot with licensing.
Indeed.
And to your point about the video on demand, it also has a lot to do with how much bandwidth you're going to give up to all this stuff.
Indeed.
Streaming content for everybody to use is a lot less bandwidth. Consuming.
Yeah, the broadcast is still, I mean, look, the cost per bit, I think we did some analysis, some math recently, and if 1,500 people are watching something live, then it makes sense to put it on a broadcast domain. And so building some intelligence in the network about how to move that around.
Yeah, it's always been a puzzle about TV everywhere, is how in the world does that scale if you really mean everywhere and not just to a PC, and you want to have your customers really accessing that stuff. You would try to avoid on demand as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's important as to where you put the assets in the network as well. So that's part of the implementation and responsiveness for a remote UI, is where do you store all these assets? I mean, it was fine when it was just text in a guide. Today there are far richer assets.
Right.
And a picture paints 1,000 words but uses as much data as 10,000 words.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure you put those assets in the right place, whether that's in the cloud or cached locally. And that's the main distinction with a remote UI from an embedded UI in a set-top. A set-top typically keeps a mini database of the up-to-date metadata which is being broadcast for all the channels, and traditionally we'd sit with an operator and say how many days, how many channels, and you'd have to allocate a block of memory which all that data would sit in. Remote UI, you don't have that. It's literally what you see is what you get. It's that page is rendered up there. With HTML5, there is provision in HTML5 to use persistent cache on the HTML5 browser, but it depends on the implementation, as you pointed out earlier on. Not all browsers are equal, and I think that's something to be aware of, that if someone just says, oh, HTML5, it's, well, whose browser? HTML5 is an emerging standard. It's not a standard. Much as, Blu-ray emerged as well, and there's embedded Blu-ray. If you want to do a guide on a Blu-ray player, why couldn't you do that? For example, it's got connection to the internet. You can just use that as a client. So it's really looking at a priority, how you want to deploy, maintaining your brand, maintaining the stickiness to your brand as well. So people go to you to get something because it's not just the the availability, it's the fact it's a good user interface.
And this takes us in, I mean, it's not just the metadata that you've got to worry about where you're putting it, but it's also, okay, now you're introducing search engines, your
Unified search is a good example.
Recommendation engines. You're introducing elements here that you haven't had on your set-top environment at all.
Absolutely, and a lot of analytics as well, because if you know precisely where people are looking in the guide, and that's being served from a server, whether, as you say, whether that's in the home or at the head end or in the cloud, you've got a lot of analytics, you know what people are doing, so the behavioral analysis.
And then you're also throwing in the access to what you've got stored personally in your own home environment. So with all of that, I guess it sounds like just a mind-boggling project to get something together that really satisfies all these needs and creates the advanced recommendations. Are people trying to do that all at once, or are they just happy to have something that says, here's where CNN is, just list the stuff? And
well, I think there are different approaches. Clearly, a lot of people want to put something out there quickly to show that they're current, they're relevant. But in the background, we're working with a number of MSOs from a professional service level to map out a roadmap to make sure that there's a sustainable deployment of these services. Because what operators typically won't want to do is deploy individual silos of technology where it's one head end for one device. You've really got to have what we refer to as a unified head end experience, where it's one back office, one OSS, one BSS, which can manage the deployment of services out there, because it's simply not sustainable as we see fragmentation in software versions and devices to build out a proprietary system for every single one.
And in that context, then it's like all of this is gated by resolving all of those problems that have to do with unifying everything in a single head end.
And that's what we do pretty well in NDS. We take complex problems, we distill them down, we work out a way of getting to market, and then we
right. And of course you have the security side, but there are other elements to the head end environment that you don't have. So, are you typically working with these other vendors in these environments that, on a specific operator like Cox, you're saying, okay, you're sitting down with a lot of people that they work with on these other things and kind of helping them get to a solution in concert with these other people, or is it more isolated than that?
Cox, as many of our other MSOs, have put a lot of investment into deployment of new guides. And so as they begin to roll them out and they're being accepted readily by consumers, they see a significant upgrade from their old guide experience. They're being rolled out. But in concert with that, we're seeing addressing that guide and some of the guide designs out to other devices. Now with Cox, they worked with their own design agency. They didn't work with NDS with our studio design. But certainly, yes, our other customers around the world are engaging with us and saying, look, we want to actually have a managed deployment out onto other devices. How can we achieve this? And that's got a design side to it. It's got the technology side to it. And then it's got the provisioning side, and of course, as you mentioned, the licensing and IP side. Are you actually allowed to do this? And that's still, it's easier in North America because it's a larger contiguous marketplace. As you go to other territories, it becomes more fragmented and it's further away from the studios, to be frank. So they're willing to experiment in their own backyards, I think, a little more.
It's interesting experimentation that's going on off the radar outside this country. But my question also was about the fact that so much of this is tied into the other elements of the head end that you don't think of in connection with a guide or in connection necessarily with alternative devices, but just to the extent that all of this is being coordinated. Are you in a room with people that are doing things like encoding and transcoding and
we've been involved in that business. I mean, historically in NDS, we came out with the first MPEG-1 encoder, so we've still got that in our DNA, but we see that as a building block in that process. So whether we're working with people who are doing transcoding, transrating, multi-formats, and we're even working with sort of cloud players as well in this area as they look to, frankly, the internet was never designed to deliver streaming video. And it's creaking at the seams, we hear, even within operator networks. So yes, we need to be aware of that. And that is a similar problem there, which format do you deliver? But I think we're converging pretty closely on sort of 1080p broadcast formats can be received by most devices today, which has an impact on the bandwidth. But that you could argue that from an encoding format, it's H.264, 1080p, that's good enough. That'll be the kind of, it'll merge towards that way if the networks can cope with it. On the DRM side and on the metadata side, that's where everything is somewhat different. You've got competition for supply of metadata. We work with TMS and Rovi, so we can supply metadata from most sources, and that's what we do in a head-end today. We gather metadata in from multiple sources, VOD libraries, broadcast services, and other ancillary services the operator may buy.
So you are supporting that piece as
Absolutely.
far as making sure that they have the metadata in the right place and accessible for these new
and better
guides.
metadata as well. And also if they need to integrate with recommendation providers as well to make sure they feel the breadth and depth of the packages available to them. Again, we have interfaces in our head-end systems to interface with people like Ginny, TV Genius, Think Analytics.
That was my next
these
question
guys.
on the recommendation side, and you are working with these other parties
Absolutely,
as
we
well.
tend to. I mean,
So
we don't like
there's
to
quite
invent our
there's
own.
quite a bit of coordination across vendors and expertise to make all this stuff
Absolutely,
come
and
together.
we are a vendor-neutral professional services organisation. We don't come in. We're not a sort of a box shifter. We don't come in and say you need one of these. Which, certainly in the North American market, where it's kind of my perspective as a foreigner, if you will, is coming in and saying it used to be saying, well, this is our latest product. Here you go, and you have a choice of this vendor or this vendor.
It's not like that
without
anymore.
naming names. We know who we are, but the world has changed somewhat. There's a lot of legacy. There's choice out there, and I think the horizontal market is shaken things up. So how can you embrace the horizontal market and the expectations of consumers to make sure that your brand is first and foremost in their mind? You've got progressive services, and you're keeping them happy, because if they're not happy, they're not going to be paying those bills.
Now, what is the state of rollout around all these projects? I mean, are we going to see a serious effort in the year ahead to where they're introducing these companion guides, device guides?
Well, we're seeing a lot of it out there already. If you look at the sort of the free market economy, the social TV experience, a lot of these social TV apps. I know at the conference here we've got some of the guys speaking that I know. They're really trying to provide a best companion device experience, but they tend to lack the link right now to efficacy. They can't do anything on the screen. We've got tools as well at NDS through our service delivery platform, which provides web APIs so that third parties could hook up to MSOs. But right now it's quite a controlled environment, and MSOs aren't really willing to federate and allow third parties to interact with their content. We're seeing some changes there in the more competitive areas where operators are saying, well, I've got a pretty good experience on a companion device. Maybe if I could let someone else act as the remote control and service discovery mechanism, but they haven't quite gone to a full kind of, anyone can access my services, which is, I think, a change in the API world that happens today. It's, are people willing to expose their network to allow other people to mash it up and use it in a different way? It's very much a controlled branding experience. And I see there's opposition there between wanting to maintain your brand and yet wanting to have the best consumer experience. So you need to battle those demons.
But I think their basic philosophy is let's do the best we can to maximize the experience as long as we maintain control.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so as this stuff starts to roll, I guess coming back to my question is, we're seeing here and there the companion device guides being introduced by Comcast and Time Warner Cable and that sort of thing. But what I'm asking about is where this becomes massive rollouts at scale involving a lot of service providers. Is that going to be
I think it's
happening this year
It's
ahead?
becoming kind of normal at the moment that people are expecting now to have a companion device with their MSO package. I mean, it's like, well, but I don't think anyone is yet churning to say I must move to a different subscriber because they've got the best app. And I'd like to.
But I am hearing there's some degree of retention.
Yes,
figures
exactly.
starting to show up with the introduction
and
of these capabilities.
Historically, when the precursors to today's tablets came out, there were operators who said, we'd love to give one of these to each of our subscribers, but then they kind of realized that the actual, the bill of materials cost for one of these devices is 4 or 5x that of a set top. So it's great when the customer's buying it themselves. And I think that's still one of the challenges is the subscriber acquisition cost is still a key part, but also is the churn rate. And if you can see as a companion device as a churn buster, or even a means of selling more VOD.
All somebody has to do is introduce one of these things that's also a set-top box, and
Well, I mean, arguably with a remote UI, it becomes
Yeah.
a set-top box.
Yeah.
But the main thing is you didn't have to pay for it as an opera.
That's what I mean.
Which is the great thing.
If these become,
We've also got
cable TV ready
with,
tablets.
with better guides. We've got one customer's on in Europe, part of the Kojiko group. They've seen VOD rates go up 160% through having a better guide, which presents not only what you're watching now, but other things that are related to that are on your disk or on the VOD library. So having a better UI isn't just about sort of a me too. It's about also having a better experience, which leads to higher ARPU. Whether that's through, if you want all the content available on a companion device, you're going to pay $5 extra a month, which I think Instat did a report recently saying that 50% I think of adult broadband users in the US would be willing to pay an extra $5 a month for viewing on other devices. That hits you, in the right place.
It'll be interesting to see if they dare to start taking up that idea and charging for it.
Well, it's happening with multi-room at the moment.
Yeah.
Multi-room, but that works well from a rights holder perspective
Right,
because
right.
you're paying per household for your content package.
Yeah.
That's where it gets shaky when you go out of the house. It's like it's more domain if we talk in a DRM perspective.
Well, James, this has been great. I think, like you say, this is fast becoming de rigueur as far as what the market requires and what consumers are going to come to expect, and it's just going to be part of the service paradigm going forward. It'd be interesting to see if they do actually charge for it.
I think someone has to pay the bills. That's the way it is. And I'd like to think that NDS is helping our customers make the right choices today.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.